Good morning, everybody. It's November 27th. We're going to call this joint City Commission County Commissioners meeting to order, along with FCDC representatives and staff. And I just want to welcome everybody. And Randall, your chair, you're calling your commissioners to order too, I guess.
Yes. Franklin County Board of County Commissioners. President here, so ready to go.
Yep.
Am I on?
There it goes.
And we're all here accounted for, so we'll just turn it over to Richard. You up? Or Derek?
Thank you all for coming this morning. The purpose of having this meeting is to give an update on Proximity Park. As you all well know, construction is well underway. And what we found is we've had a lot of interest in the park recently. And so as staff, we have decided now's the appropriate time to get the boards together and discuss where do we go from here? What is the process for selling a property like this? We've got Chris Gutierrez, president of KC Smartport, down here to talk to you about what some other communities have done, what incentives they've offered, what incentives we might be able to offer to be competitive, as well as to kind of talk us through the process. You know, what is a site selector? What do they look for when they're here? And so ultimately our hope is at the end of this, we'll at least have the discussion started on what we need to do moving forward. And as we get through this, time permitting, we might also talk about how we want to market this property. Do we want to do it internally through FCDC? Do we want to use some kind of broker? What are our options there? And so hopefully you all find it helpful. You're welcome.
So I want to take a few minutes here and read a passage from the book Our Town. Some of you have heard this because our esteemed city attorney read this to the city commission. And I think this is important to set the stage not only for our discussion today, but what we have to do in order to make Proximity Park successful. So Our Town, a couple authors went across the United States, picked out towns that are successes and had conversations with the leadership in those towns. And this is a reading from Columbus, Mississippi. As part of the courtship process, Higgins Group arranged a site visit by the Yokohama Corporate High Command. Helicopter tours of the area, green tea and hot, moist towels to refresh the visitors at each stop. Galoshes to protect their shoes from the Black Prairie after a rainstorm. During the aerial view, Higgins took Yokohama's chairman over the ruins of what had been, for nearly a century, the economic foundation of West Point. This was a meat packing plant, locally owned for decades by the Bryan family and then taken over by the firm that eventually closed it, Sara Lee. I told the chairman of Yokohama that this was an area that played a lot of stress on long-term relationships. Long-term relationships, Higgins told me. People worked for Bryan for generations. When that plant left, it tore the heart out of the whole community, I said. You can be the phoenix rising up for the next generations. Hokey, yes. But Higgins said that the helicopter then did several circles around the plant. While the chairman stared down at the devastation, he looked over at me and nodded. Higgins said, I told the pilot we can go now. Now, the most important part of that passage is that we're trying to build relationships with the companies and the prospects that we are trying to bring to Proximity Park. Thank you.
Thanks. Aaron?
Good morning, Commissioners. Darren Ammon with Bartlett & West. I'm excited to have a couple minutes to speak with you. And I really just got three items that I'm going to touch upon today. And the first one is to have us as a group think back before we even got to what's on the board over there today and what we created throughout the process. Was really thinking about, number one, where do we want to be? What are we going to do? And then how are we going to get there? And I'm excited today to hear more from Chris and Ellie with KC Smartport on some of their experiences within the region and nationally and internationally even on some of the things that they experience and see to help take communities like Ottawa and Franklin County to the next level. Because obviously our vision was to create an industrial park, to bring more workforce, enhance life amenities within the community, and do lots of different things. And we've got this far, but we need to start thinking about taking the next step. Where construction stands today, just so everybody knows, it's going really well. Obviously the snow recently is going to slow things down a little bit, but they're mainly working on the bridge right now, so they can continue doing that even in this weather. The roads have been going in very well. They're actually probably, according to schedule, a little bit ahead of schedule in terms of percentages. Haven't run into very many issues per se, things that have been able to be mitigated and move forward. So I'm excited that construction is going very well also. But what I would like to do now is just take a moment to introduce Chris Gutierrez, the president of KC Smartport. And we are very lucky. Bartlett and West is an investor in KCADC, but to have folks like Chris Gutierrez and Ellie Bowen with KC Smartport, they're the best. They're the best in the nation, really, in my opinion, in terms of talking about marketing the KCADC region as one whole. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit more about some of his experiences and how he can help us.
Good morning, Commissioners. I appreciate being here. I've met most of you. I think I've seen most of you. It's always a pleasure to be here. I've been involved since the beginning of this, and I told Darren not to set me up too much. The formality of all of you sitting up there already caught me when I walked in, so hopefully we can make this a good dialogue. But I applaud that you're all here. This is an important step. It's an important step you've been taking for a long time, and I'll say it right out of the gate. I've told your group from the beginning, faster, 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 and I know that's easy for me to say, tough for you to make those decisions, but it's the reality of what we do for economic development. But as Darren and Richard both said, I'm joined by Ellie Bowen, who's our Vice President of Business Development at Smartport. A little background, KCADC and Smartport are the same entity for the most part. Our job is to attract new investment into the region. The region to us is 18 counties. You know a lot of this stuff already. And Ellie and I specifically focus on industrial deals, or what we call freight-based projects, manufacturing, distribution, warehousing. Very keen to what you're trying to develop at a proximity park. So our job, again, is to tell nationally, for the most part, we also do it on an international basis, why this region makes the best sense for facilities, new investments to take place. You've had a number of opportunities, number of projects that have looked at the site on paper, which is always a challenge to us. They do a lot of this screening before we even get engaged. So you've got to be out there in terms of data and opportunity before they even come in. And then you've had site visits as well. So you're progressing very well. But again, I'll say it again, faster, faster, faster. And the reason I keep saying that, our clients, which a majority of the deals we work, 75% are led by site selection consultants, and I'll talk about that. And then some are led by the companies themselves. But their interest, their decision to move forward with any new investment has gotten shorter and shorter over the last 5 years. Speed to market is the saying they tell us, that when they decide they need another facility or a consolidated facility, their decision-making timeframe is so short. And I've been doing economic development for almost 30 years. And right out of the gate when I started doing this, someone told me economic development is about not being eliminated. It's not about being in the hunt. It's making sure you make the next step. Because there's plenty of parks, there's plenty of communities, there's plenty of opportunity. You've got to make sure you've met the request for information from clients right out of the gate, or you'll get eliminated and they'll keep moving. It's a hard business, but it's what we do. I wanted to also emphasize that a lot of what we do is confidential. Our clients now are making us sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, right from the start. So while some of what we do is code name, project this or project that, it's really dictated by the clients that we work for, that we need to keep some of that as confidential as possible. We'll have the local communities, local counties sign NDAs on top of that to be able to share information, but it's really dictated by the client. Site selection consultants, they are, it's very interesting, Richard's reading the passage he read about moist towels to wipe them off and this kind of stuff. They are an egotistical bunch by who they are, because they know they're in front of you and their clients behind you and or behind them, and you've got to work through them. So they demand some of that, and again, you've got to take it with a grain of salt. But they're a group that represent there's a number of different site selection consultants. There are accounting firms, law firms, real estate firms, audit firms, or some of them are boutique site consultants. This is all they do. And again, just by the nature of who they are and that they're representing a client who's going to make a big investment, they demand certain things and certain timing and certain responses faster than a lot of us appreciate. But again, they're looking to eliminate you to not, as opposed to keep you, so you've got to meet their timelines. Some of them are responsive to know that what they're asking is a lot, and they give you a little leeway. Some of them demand it in 24 hours, 48 hours. And again, our team at KCADC and Smartport have been built around responding to this, so we know that's what it takes, but it challenges you and your staff that when we send you information and we need this, it's not us trying to be hard with you, it's the consultant who's demanding on us. And again, we try to appreciate the local community's responsiveness, but we also need to know that we've got 5 or 6 or 7 sites we're putting together as one to submit. So it's not just us coming to you, it's all of that request that we've got to get together and get to the client. And we've been fortunate over the last few years that we've stood up a couple consultants to say that's unreasonable. You know you're not going to need that data that quickly. It's a balance because we don't want to push them too hard, but then again, we know that a lot of the stuff they're asking for, they already have. So we try to protect you a little bit as much as we can, but it's not always the case that we can do that. But again, the confidentiality is throughout the whole process. But those consultants, they lead a lot of these deals, and they know the client. They've done a lot of homework before they come to us. They've done all of the screening of sites, taxes, business environment, labor environment, all those things, and they're almost coming to us to validate what they already have found. So we've got to be responsive with our information to them to make sure they understand why it's a good site or a good community to be in. The way we work projects is when we get contacted either by the consultant or the company, or in some cases the state gets the lead. And it's always funny to Ellie and I, we'll get contacted by the state of Kansas, and generally within 24 hours we get contacted by the state of Missouri. They're representing the same client. The challenge to us is when they code name them differently and us trying to balance which project it is. But most times both states are involved at looking at the region. We immediately send an email to our community partners. We just opened Project X. This is the parameters. This is what they're looking for, and here's the timeline to submit. Please let us know if you have a site, a building, what you want to do. And we move that forward. We also send an email that's much more condensed to the real estate community, saying here's what's required. Do you have property in real estate that we should submit? But our policy is to quickly say to the real estate community, once you respond, we're going to let the community you suggested their site or building. They need to confirm that it is in your, as the leadership, in the eyes of what you want for that site. We're not going to let a community be misrepresented by a real estate person because ultimately it's your site, it's your building. But we send that initial email. We get the community information back, we put that into a collective response to the site consultant and submit that, and then we move forward. There was a question on what was sent to me on how fast these projects move. I can't answer that. Some of them are that 24 hours, 48 hours, some of them are a little bit longer. We have a joke internally, hurry up and wait, because they immediately want the information and then there's a delay. Either they didn't get all the information they wanted, or they're waiting for another state. I had a project that was almost to the end, and we learned they were waiting for one state to respond. My response was, shouldn't they have been eliminated? They hadn't responded by the timeline. But they wanted to confirm what that state's incentive policy was or offer. But each one of them are different. You have a few weeks review, you have some follow-up information where they'll counter what you submitted and want follow-up to clarify what you submitted. And then we start the game of site visits. Generally, a site consultant will come with a lot of requests. We've had 50, 60, 70 communities or sites they're looking at across the region. Then they cut down to the site visit. When they come in, they are very, Ellie can tell you this, they're very down to the minute of what they want to accomplish. It's not us saying, well, we're going to show you this site, we're going to do this. A lot of it is dictated by them. You recently had a site visit where the window of us coming here was pretty tight. Luckily, Ellie had to deal with that. It was very fast and very efficient on their part. And you got to think, for us, it's 18 counties, about a 100-mile radius of downtown Kansas City, that we have to hit all of that in a short window of a site visit. Because generally, the consultant's looking at 3 or 4 communities in a 1-week time frame. They don't have a lot of time to engage and really take a tour. They're looking specifically at the site, meeting you, understanding your policies, and moving forward. Those site visits happen on almost every project. It's just how quickly they cut to a short list. And again, keeping in mind that we're trying not to be eliminated, you want to make after that site visit to get the follow-up. Specifically, Ellie's project was an odd one. They wanted to see the sites, meet the community, then they hit us with the RFI. And I can't remember exactly, but I think the RFI Ellie had to manage was 32 pages long. Unfortunately, your site didn't make that next cut, but think about how detailed, after you've already had them here, to then they want specific written information. I'll tell you, for you guys, this site, this development gets you in the game, very much so. And again, remember what I said earlier, faster, faster, faster. This site is really engaged in our community, in our region. It is viable. It's right on the highway. You've done a tremendous job of moving it forward. What challenges Ottawa today, it challenges a lot of our regional communities, is workforce. And I know you already know that. I know your team already knows that. It's not good anymore when the politicians, no offense to any of you, say 3.3% unemployment rate. That hurts us, but it's nationally. What we need to do is address how we're suggesting workforce can be resolved. Your team has done a tremendous job with your high schools and a lot of things that you've done here. That's a great response that we can tell a consultant, yes, it's a tight labor market, but look what this community is doing to address that, to get the pipeline. Ellie leads our workforce efforts, and there's two main focuses we have this year. Get people to the job site, public transportation, ride share, other things. How do we get them from where they live to where the job is? In our region, I can't speak specifically for you guys, 18% of jobs can be reached by public transportation. That's not good enough, because jobs in warehouse, distribution, manufacturing, a lot of those employees don't have their own vehicles. How do we get them to the job site? Second, and if you've heard me speak at other places, I tell everyone, go home and tell your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, nephews, that industrial jobs are careers. They should be thinking about working in a distribution center or a manufacturing center. It is a great job, pays well, highly skilled, but there's an interest gap. Not a lot of us are going to go home and tell those kids that. We need to change that. We need to make those jobs interesting to young kids, young employees, because there are opportunities. But it's not what's happening now. We need to change that. Those are two things we're working on in workforce. Again, you are addressing it. It's just still a challenge. When the consultant already does their own labor analytics, they already know before they ask us what your ratio is. They score them all. How do you change that mindset? How do you address that to them of what you're doing to fill the pipeline or to get them the workers they need today? We had a consultant tell us once, that's great, everything you're doing, but did you talk to the 8th graders yesterday about the jobs I'm going to bring tomorrow so that my pipeline will stay filled? It's a different environment. The first question we get with every consultant is workforce. The second question, third question is workforce, not just for projects in Ottawa, everywhere. So it's tough. But you guys do compete. Your site, again, it'd be great if you had it farther along. It'd be great if you had a spec building. And again, it's easy for me to say these things. You got to make that decision. But to the question that Derek said, do we sell this land? How do we market it? That's a decision you got to make. The faster you can get it in front of us, the faster you can get it in front of marketing brochures, details on the site, all the utilities, everything you're already doing, the faster we have that to get in front of a consultant, the better. How you get to the next step is a decision you need to make. Lastly, for me, and again, I know you had me for 30 minutes, but hopefully there's more questions, but is the incentive conversation. Incentives generally are the last, I shouldn't say it, they're going to ask incentive questions right away in the RFI, but it's usually the last review of a consultant. They're looking to keep you to the last round to say, we can do this in Columbus, Mississippi, whatever the example you gave, or Ottawa. Now let's look at the incentives and how does that add to the bottom line. The client's decision, that speed to market, they want to see how you're going to help them in immediate in their investment, cash flow. Not long-term incentive play, but how does it affect locally? They want to see both. You are competitive in some of the incentives we've seen you give, but more and more, because of your distance from the metro, you're going to have to be quicker to get even more aggressive, because if you say this is our incentive policy and wait for them to respond, you got to be ready to respond quickly. I'm not suggesting you give away stuff or do those kind of things, because that doesn't help your community, but you've got to be ready at the table for the next step. You can't draw a line and say this is our incentive, because every client's going to be a little bit different. You don't know what the competition's doing, We're not allowed to tell you what the competition's doing on projects. But communities are quick to respond to say, hey, we offered you this much tax abatement for this many years, but with these numbers you're telling us, we're willing to go a little bit higher. Again, owning the site, how do you move that in an aggressive incentive? There are communities around you, and I'll pick on Topeka because they're maybe the closest. They're probably the most aggressive community we work with in our region. Because of their sales tax of the county and city, they can be. They offer free land. I'm not suggesting you do that, but you've got a neighbor or a close community that does. There are some communities on the Missouri side that do that. I will tell you, on the Missouri side, they are getting more and more aggressive. How do they compete with Kansas that doesn't have tax on equipment and machinery? Where Missouri, you can get there through Chapter 100 and other ways, but they're trying to find ways to even make it faster without public review, which is challenging in our world. You've got to be at the table. You've got to be ready to step to the next line. Because unfortunately or fortunately, your proximity, your location is a little bit outside the region. You're going to have to try to mitigate that with certain things. The workforce is one, incentive is another. It's not me telling you that, it's a consultant we deal with in the reality of the business we're in. But know that you're at the table. You've had a number of looks just recently. You've been in the game. A recent project told us everything you did was right on point. You made the next round. Workforce hurt you. And proximity to the markets they need to serve. You can't change the markets they serve. You can address the workforce a little bit more and some other things. But I don't know if there's any specific things other than that you wanted me to tell you. But know that we're a partner to yours. Again, I've been out here a number of times helping you move this project online. We know about your site. We know about your county and your community. We will continue to market it. We are marketed aggressively. The more you can give us on marketing brochures and other, the better it helps us, because those consultants are looking at that stuff online ahead of before us being engaged. They've got to be able to see it. So I'll stop there. I know you've got some other speakers, and I know there's questions or I don't know how you want to handle this.
Chris, I have a question
Yeah.
for you. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
My question would be, can you tell us about a few programs that may be nationwide or even worldwide that may be working, that you see that is working, that is creating buzz among those younger generations, in which that we are creating excitement about logistics, about manufacturing, and things that we may be able to do here that you already know that is working? Obviously,
Yeah.
we're looking for, the
Yeah.
perfect
I mean, your
scenario.
program to get high school kids into the facilities here is great. Let them see what it is, because if they don't have an idea of what does that mean, working in a warehouse distribution center. But the next step is getting the counselors and the parents there. Because the kid goes home all excited, I just toured Walmart, I just
Right.
toured American Eagle, and the parent says, yeah, no. You're going to college, you're doing this, or you're gonna do this. They gotta be engaged. Because if they go home and all excited and the parent shuts it down, so you gotta get the parents. And that's a challenge. Do you go to PTA meetings? How do you get the parents? You've gotta get the school to embrace it. We've seen other communities in our region and around the country where there's that connection between the student and the company, that they're either doing tours or the company's coming into the school to talk about the jobs they have, one-on-one or in a big group environment. There's a group in Kansas City that does these, what they call career jumping. Jokingly, some people call them speed dating. You talk about intimidating. It's intimidating for me to speak to you guys today. Talk about going in front of 6, 7 high school students that you don't know about what careers are out there, and then a bell rings and 5 more sit down after 15 minutes, and you do that for an hour. But you get them excited about what's possible for them, either right out of high school or after a community college or a certificate. You've got great community college here. I mean, all those programs get them. So engage the students and their parents about what the opportunity is. The other thing I think that's growing right now is apprenticeship programs, where there's certain communities, certain companies that will engage the kids early. There's a company in Liberty, Missouri that has about a dozen high school students in their factory every day, experiencing it, seeing what the job is. Even if they go on to do something else with their career, they've engaged them at an earlier level to get engaged. So that direct experience is probably the best. But again, it's not just the kids, it's their parents and other influencers that are in their life.
Yeah, Chris, like you said, it's very competitive out there, and of course, anyone that drives to Kansas City would go by Edgerton, and we see what the goings on there and the expansion going on there. And that's what we think sometimes of our competition, but I realize it's more of a regional thing, maybe more national. But as we drive by that facility, if we're competing with them, which we are, what advantage do you see on our location versus Edgerton?
You know what, Ellie and I just drove by Edgerton, and it seems like every time we drive by there, something new is happening. They are feeling the effects of that growth for a small town. They're being challenged on the workforce side, and they're doing different things to address it among themselves. The Edgerton development, and specifically their development partner, North Point, is challenging the whole market, not just in Kansas City, but other regions. They are very aggressive on their lease rates and their terms and other things they're doing. But for you, I think the competitive advantage you have is the site and maybe the limited competition for development that you have. Again, in Edgerton, there's so much happening that the companies are fighting among themselves, which is not a good environment to be in. They're trying to balance that as a community and a region. But I think this is a competitive advantage. You're all sitting at the same table here looking on how do you move that forward. That's not always the case in communities that see a lot of growth quickly. It can blind them to what they need to address. So I think your continued focus on why this park is the success that you're going to have, and you just need to be at the table and quicker with information, data, response, all of those things. But it's a hard question to ask. I mean, Edgerton is rising the tide for all of us. And it's really the development with Edgerton supporting the development. It's 12, 13 million square feet in half the time they thought that they'd get to 7 million.
Yeah, incredible.
It's crazy.
You mentioned a spec building. Is that typically, or is this what people are already looking for, a spec building, or is this something that only is going to be directed toward one select group of potential occupants?
It is generally a distribution spec building because manufacturers have unique characteristics of the building. They want drains in a certain spot, they want certain floor thickness and other things. So it's hard to do a manufacturing spec building unless you do a very basic shell without a floor and some other things. Chillicothe's been successful at doing that, where they put the walls in the ceiling up and they leave the floor unfinished for whoever might like it, whoever might pick it. But generally, it's a distribution center. And I would say out here, Darren's team probably has more direct insight onto what size and the ceiling heights and other things you need to look at. What we're seeing right now is more 150 to 250 is what need in the region. That can be multi-tenant, not a single tenant, and be flexible and quick on how that's done. You know, it's the old adage when you go in a store, you're looking for this product, but you buy 5 others. If you've got a building, you're going to get interest. That might then take a land site to do something different, even though the building got them to look here. Again, I hate to keep saying it's easy for me to say because it's not my money, but clients want something that shows you've progressed and you clearly want development, and we're going to go there. A spec building helps in that regard.
Thank you.
Chris, what about, is anyone doing like virtual buildings, like you have already approved the zoning, the plans, the sites and everything, and it's just ready to go? Tell us when you want it, rather than a spec building that is pretty expensive to carry if you have to carry it long.
You know what, there's 2 things. There's spec building, which obviously is a big investment. The next step for us is called vertical ready. You've already done everything. You already know where the utilities are. You guys have already proved the development, the zoning, the incentives, all that stuff. Then tomorrow, when they pick your site, they're going vertical. So the more you can get to that point and show a client what it could look like, whether it's a virtual, you know, and again, the Bartlett team has already been involved in doing that kind of stuff to show what it could look like on the site, whether that's pre-project or quickly when a project says, we need 150,000 square feet on this, to quickly show them, here's what it looks like on our park, the better. But it's that speed to get it done that really makes a difference, however you do that. Vertical or virtual buildings is a good marketing effort to get in front of projects, but you've got to be responsive when the client comes to show them how it might look. So it doesn't hurt, Tom. I mean, it's really showing that vertical ready.
Then there's the other question is that we're kind of known for who you've been and where you are. We're right now Edgerton distribution with some assembly, I guess, going on too. And we are also with Walmart and American Eagle, but we do have manufacturing and assembly. Now, how do we, are you seeing any manufacturing interested because of all the distribution companies that are here, or the facilities here? Are we going to be able to kind of enter into some of the higher end manufacturing and robotic industries and stuff?
You and the region already is. I mean, the recent project that I keep hinting towards was a very precise manufacturing operation. There would be distribution associated with it, but our project load, I was telling Blaine earlier, we are very active this year. We've had a very good year in terms of success for the region. We haven't had a great year. And there's, again, I said all the speed to market companies, they've driven us to a point where now it's a decision point, and they pause a little bit with midterm elections, they pause a little bit with trade and tariffs. There's some other decisions that have caused them to delay a decision maybe. So we're either going to have a unbelievable, crazy December, or we're going to have a great start in 2019 because we've got a number of deals. But I'll tell you, Tom, a lot of where we see right now is manufacturing, with distribution still keeping active, but it's three sectors in a broad scope. It's automotive continuing. It's unfortunate GM's decision recently. Luckily, it doesn't affect our plants, but automotive is still a supplier base, is still a big manufacturing project load for us. Second is food-related companies, whether that's raw materials or processed food or finished products. There's a lot in the pipeline right now. And then third is higher-end manufacturing, like you talked about, robotics and automation. The Midwest is a sweet spot for that. There's cost advantages to doing that here. And it's both domestic and foreign companies that are looking at the Midwest right now. So those three sectors are keeping us very busy right now. And again, it's both site consultant, mostly site consultant led, but there's a few companies we're working directly. And then animal health has always been a great activity for us. As you know, KCDC has an animal health corridor. There's a team that works on those. Ellie and I support that team when it's manufacturing and distribution, but they lead those projects. But manufacturing is equally important to us right now in terms of our deal flow.
Are you seeing, because of the tariff talk, are you seeing some of that maybe influencing companies to come back?
You know, there's a lot of reasons why companies are building more manufacturing. The economy's incredible right now, U.S. and globally. There is some foreign companies and U.S. companies bringing manufacturing into the U.S. to support what could be related to policies and other things. I mean, nobody's coming right out and saying, we're looking at the Midwest because of this. It's really their business environment is driving them to do that. But it is making companies think a little bit differently on how they invest or what they invest, where their raw materials are coming from, whether it's related to the trade and tariff issues or whether it's just sourcing of those products or those materials. So it's influencing decisions, but nobody's coming right out and saying we're doing this because of that.
Thank you.
Chris, with 18 counties within your region, you have an opportunity to see how the delivery of economic development services are in several different ways. And we're at kind of an opportunity now, or a position now. The most nimble organizations that you deal with, are they owned by the government entities, or do they have an independent aspect like what we have, or what do you see?
Most communities and counties have moved to somewhat of an independent economic development organization, supported by the government bodies, but then also supported potentially by companies and other things to move it forward. Local companies or companies that are invested in the region. So most regions are that way. There are exceptions. Riverside is one that is all driven by the city. And there's a few others that are that way. But the responsiveness is the key. The companies and the consultants aren't going to eliminate you because you're set up this way or that. They're going to see how quickly you respond. Whether that's early decisions, early submittal, or when it comes to a decision by the governing body, how quickly that can be done. And there are crazy exceptions. I mentioned Riverside. Riverside will hold a meeting tomorrow if they need to make a decision versus they scheduled. Our committee meets on every third Thursday. They will do it. Edgerton will do it overnight. I mean, they've put those things in place because of the speed of how much development's happening. I'm not saying you have to do that. Companies are responsive to know there's certain scheduled meetings they have to go through. They want to know how public those meetings are, how much of their deal do they have to say, what is the process? As long as you can answer those questions and follow that schedule, they're going to be okay with it. They need to know it up front. So I don't think how your economic development group, the more responsive you can be, sometimes that's easier once removed from government. Again, hard for me to say in front of you guys, but it is the truth. But you ultimately are going to be engaged no matter how it's set up, and you got to be responsive to that client.
Okay.
When you, on your website, do you, is it advantageous or not necessary to give some idea of what your incentives are, or do you just say negotiable, come see us, whatever, or I haven't looked at very many economic development websites lately, but.
Yeah. I'll defer to Ellie to confirm what I'm about to say. I don't think on your website you need to put your incentive policy out there, and you definitely don't want to say negotiable. I think that comes in a response to an RFI
in
of
the
client.
responses.
What the client wants to know, and the data that they're looking before they come to us, is the site or building that's available, your labor market that's available, your cost related to the community or the county you're in. They're going to look at that kind of data. Again, the incentive conversation is usually after the fact, so my opinion, and again, I'll let Ellie say if I'm right or wrong in the deal she's working, I don't think you want to put that on your website. And again, in response, you don't want to say negotiable, because the client wants to know what it is, because you will be eliminated if everybody else says, we're going to do this, this, and this, and your response is negotiable. She's shaking her head.
When you talked about workforce development, seems like to me that the right company comes, it will draw that workforce to them and not have to have it all locally provided.
Very true. It's a hard conversation. We and our staffing and workforce partners are now telling companies, and again, it's difficult for us to say this, but we're telling them it's your fault. You haven't created an environment, a culture, a want-to-be-at-work place, as well as compensation that keeps your workers there or attracts your workers there. So we like to say it's not that we don't have a workforce, it's here, but you got to engage them. And again, to see companies like American Eagle, it's a cool place to work. They do great stuff to create a culture that the employees want to be there. And again, who would have thought 5 years ago a distribution center would create that? And I haven't been out there to see if they have pool tables and all that kind of crazy stuff that tech companies have, but distribution centers are doing that because they want the workers to be engaged. So somewhat it's the employers who say, I can't get the workforce and I'm only paying $9 an hour. Well, that's probably why you can't get the workforce. You've got to create an environment and a pay structure that wants them to be there versus seeing the company across the street say, we're paying 25 cents more than you, and the employee jumps. That's not a culture that's going to keep your workforce. So you're right. The right company is going to get the workforce they want. And the workforce is going to stay because they've created a culture and environment that they want to be there.
Okay, any more questions?
Chris, how much do they consider the ability of a business to draw workers from outside of the area? I mean, currently Ottawa draws people from other counties to come and work at facilities here because of the vocation. I'm just wondering how that plays in, because we are situated in such a good location transportation-wise with so many highways.
Companies will do their own analysis, and we will at 15, 30, 45, 60-mile radius of what the workforce is. And they'll want to know from you how many people leave Ottawa, Franklin County to go to some other job that could stay here if we paid them right and engaged them right. There was a big automotive supplier that went to Blue Springs recently, Forcia. The community, who is a city-run organization, gave them numbers of how many people leave Blue Springs every day for a job, and what they work, where they work, what they make, and that engaged the company to say, look at that base that leaves, that will stay for the right pay, for the right job. So they're going to look at a radius of employment, and it's what Ellie and I promote, that our region, they'll drive 45 minutes for the right job, because we all know there's no congestion here. You can make, we can complain about I-35 this morning, driving out this morning, but no congestion in our market. People respond to that. They know that people will drive for that job, or getting better, the public transportation to do that job. They'll move, they'll drive farther than other regions, other communities, other metropolitan areas for the right job. And the clients will look at that. They'll analyze that.
This might be a better question for Ellie, but on our last, the site visit you mentioned, was our labor shed study adequate, recent enough? Was that document solid?
It was part of the reasons you didn't make the next cut.
So it's,
So while the data was there that they did on themselves and you were responsive to the client, it was part of the reason you didn't make the cut.
That we-
Clarity, the timing of the study or the fact that we were pulling from a fairly wide area to get that count?
We actually, that was an independent study. Chris mentioned that there's a lot of data that's pulled from the consultants on their own before we even know there's a project. This project is a perfect example. They ran an independent labor study of the region as a whole and in specific communities and sectors of the region. We still haven't seen that data and probably never will. So that was a reason for elimination here. Your team did an excellent job of trying to tell that story. That's why maybe that data shows unfavorably compared to other markets. This is the story of Franklin County and of Ottawa, but at the end of the day, it was the data that killed it.
And Ellie makes a good point. That data analysis that they did, we'll never see. We try hard to get feedback from consultants on why this community got eliminated or why that. And some will give us great feedback and they're willing to talk to you, and here's what, others will this and this, and we know nothing beyond that. Specifically, this consultant, you know, I joked earlier about egotistical consultants. It depends on the wind. He might be supportive to tell us something. He might just shut us down and say, yeah, they were eliminated. And they won't tell us anything until the deal's done and announced, and way beyond really giving us that specific feedback right away so we can respond to the next deal. But
And I would add, is that we talked about this in our internal team. This was a 50-acre deal, but the site consultant told, one of them told me that they typically do 150-acre deals and they liked the site. So from our perspective, just getting them here as a consultant was the big deal, not so much that specific client.
yeah.
top of
For
mind.
us. Yeah.
Yeah, the site and everything about your response was well received. Other factors eliminated the project. And again, clients generally, specifically some of these bigger ones, will do that protective, we want 100 acres so that no one else locates near us for this reason or that reason versus the 50 we really need for the development. It depends on the client.
Is that common that they're going to be producing their own labor shed study, or is, I mean, there's been some talk about updating our own labor shed study. Is that money well spent, or is that a waste of money?
It is extremely common. It is rare that a consultant doesn't already have a study done. We had a Jones Lang LaSalle JLL consultant speak to our board a while back. He had at least 40 different categories of data they look at before they even contact us. And they were down to some areas that we don't even pay attention to. They all do it. The challenge around labor studies, you know, I'll be honest and let Ellie add, by the time you get it done, it's outdated. It doesn't hurt to have it, that the client then sees you paid attention to something that's critical to their decision, and they'll appreciate it. I don't think they'll look at it, because they've already done their own. But what they want is when they come here, they want to talk to your other companies that are here to really hear what we call in the office street level data. Yeah, of course, you're paid to tell us all this stuff. What does the companies in your community tell them? And again, because of that tight labor market, it's harder and harder to get local companies to meet with a consultant who's bringing another company in. And that's something Ellie is fighting for us to make sure that we have those companies who are willing to talk. Labor study helps because they see that you paid attention to it and helps you make decisions locally, but they've already done it.
Chris, do you see value in a previous life? I had we had actually gone out and looked at site consultants some of them specialize in distribution, some of them specialize in manufacturing, some of them in animal health. Would it be a good thing to target a site consultant in one of those industries and bring them in to Ottawa and Franklin County and introduce them around, show them the site, just so that the knowledge spreads throughout that sector of what we have and what we have to offer and where we are and what we're doing.
It would absolutely be a benefit, but it's a challenge to get them to do that. We've had consultants tell us that they could be on the road every day of the year because they're getting invited to come things. KCADC does that on a regular basis. 2 or 3 times a year, we'll bring consultants in. Ellie and I were laughing among ourselves because we have a Chiefs Thursday night football game coming up in a couple of weeks, and we've been struggling to get consultants to come in for that, even though we're going to put this great Chiefs game barbecue crawl combination. It's a challenge to get them in, but when we do, we invite your team to be part of that visit. So maybe they don't come here, but you get to interact with them. And Bartlett and West and others are involved in some of those things. It's a challenge to get them to commit. They'll come if you pay them to advise you on what you should do, which is not always the best case. But yeah, it would benefit, and if we can help you do that, we would be glad to do it, but know that it's even a challenge for us to get them into the region.
Commissioner, if you'll.
I know you do those tours, yeah.
I went on behalf of FCDC down to the Southern Area Council meeting and had a contact with the site selector and encouraged him to come. And he said, well, I might come to this barbecue thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's been rescheduled, but every time it's been rescheduled, we've talked again, and he's actually scheduled to come here to look at our site on his way to their barbecue event, and is going to stay the night. FCDC agreed to host him at the local hotel, and we're going to have
Awesome.
An opportunity, really a half a day with him, which I thought was fabulous time. But he's, it was just an opportunity for us to show it to somebody who's not always up here, but can be, and if he had the right client, might be a good contact for us.
I mean,
And
like
that was
Richard
just,
said, it's a relationship game. The more you can interact with them, and we do this, what we call a red box campaign. It's literally a red box with a big KC sticker on the top. And every quarter we send we call our top 100 site consultant list. It's actually 200 some. And in it is something from Kansas City with a message about why that something relates to why your client would do well to locate here. It's fun to hear the consultants say when the red box hits, people in the office fight over who's going to get it, even though it's named this person or that person. So it's received well. Everybody does mailers, it's a competitive environment. There's magazines just for those site consultants that 99% of the magazine is ads versus any content. It's a tough market to get in, but having a one-on-one meeting is the key. It's challenging because you've got to go to that conference, you've got to psych them out. But Ellie was at the same conference. I mean, we go to a lot of those things to build that relationship with those consultants as best we can. And I think the email this morning said we had 8, potentially 10 coming in for the Chiefs barbecue crawl. So it's great that consultant's coming in and it's going to spend some time here. That's key.
Great. Now, Chris, except for the completion of our project, which, we're at a disadvantage for that reason, is there anything that should keep us 10 commissioners awake at night?
Wow, good question. Another snowstorm. No, I wouldn't put it that way. I think it's a competitive environment. You need to be engaged. You need to move the project forward. And again, I know I'm getting a broken record faster, but the quicker you get it to where it is shovel ready or vertical ready or whatever the term you want to use, the better. And the key is to stay engaged with your partners at the state and us, to know what consultants are saying, be at those events that Wendy was, others. So I wouldn't say it's stay awake at night. The workforce, the more you focus on that and the more you engage on that, the better you're going to be able to address that to a client. There is no silver bullet with that. There's Ellie's working on a activity right now looking at an electrical engineer who went to college and got the degree, and an electrician who went through a apprenticeship model, and where they are 2 years after getting their certification, 4 years, 5 years, what they make, how much debt they have. And it's a surprising comparison. But that is a way to sell that student and their parent, hey, we're not talking about doing this. We're talking about being competitive in your life, this way or that way. Workforce is something that keeps us up because it is more and more. Not that everybody's got the challenge, but you can't say that. Well, you're going to find that in Memphis. You're eliminated. You got to talk about what you've done to address it that might be different than Memphis.
Okay, any last question for Chris, anybody? We probably ought to move on.
Great,
All
thank
right,
you.
Chris, thank you very much for your brutal honesty. I appreciate that. We need to hear that. I guess next we've got, Lisa, are you up? Or Ellie, were you going to say anything? I'm sorry.
You covered it.
You covered, okay. And Lisa, you can move that up and down, with that button there. We'd like to see someone utilize that at least once today.
I'm not touching anything.
Oh, okay.
Good morning. I don't have a lot to say this morning, but I do want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and the invitation to participate. I think, as you're all aware, we are currently, and have been really for the majority of this year, in a state of transition. In fact, Thursday, 10 o'clock, I hope to see most, if not all of you there. We do actually begin our strategic planning process to actually talk about where we're at and where we're going. I know I said at our annual meeting that transition is always a really good time to do some self-evaluation, and I think that's exactly what we're going to be doing. As I look back at the history of this organization, having been part of the transition from OFCED to FCDC and our current structure, what I'm struck by is the fact that it's always been a great collaboration between both public and private organizations to come together for the community. And really hope through the strategic planning process we can continue that conversation to decide what makes sense for the community both now and going into the future. So with that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions about where we're at right now or where we think we're going, or that's really probably all I had.
Any questions?
Josh?
That's quick. Hey, thanks, Lisa.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate that. Guess we got the next trio, Richard, Derek, and Blaine. Who all wants to go first on this one? Yeah, I'd say so.
So Lisa, I can operate this.
What's this?
So first thing I want to say is, Ellie and Chris, I appreciate you being here. This has been tremendously helpful, and we appreciate the partnership that we have with KCADC very much. So just to kind of wind up, as we go down the road, your team is going to be talking about that incentive policy. We're going to be talking about whether Proximity Park we ought to self-market or we ought to develop an RFQ for you to look at. We are going to work on what the pricing of that land is, what we're trying to achieve, where's our price point, what are we doing with impact fees, how do we share those costs. And I just tell you that because that's a big part of this conversation is what Chris talked to you about. And you will be the final approval of all those policies, but that is something that we have been talking about and we're going to continue to talk about in earnest so we can have all those tools in our toolkit and we're ready to go. I also think in winding up my remarks, Chris said partnership. Columbus, Mississippi talked about relationships. And it is vitally important that you 10 elected officials are partners and that you work through this and you continue to be partners and you continue to work together to promote Proximity Park. And you've done that for what, 5-6 years now. We could not be to the spot we're at if it were not for present elected officials and past elected officials that when this idea was brought to you, that you saw what the vision was, and we're here because of you. And I think it's also important to remember that we're also partners with FCDC, we're partners with the school district, we're partners with Neosho County Community College, we're partners with Ottawa University. We're blessed to have partners that are of a quality level as what we have. And we are also partners with our community, with our 26,000 citizens. And it is important for us to remember that that's who we serve And that's who we're trying to make improvements for, so those 26,000 citizens can turn to their children and say, this is exciting. You have a future here. You need training, you need to get a certificate, you need to do whatever you do, but we have the jobs here so that Franklin County and the cities within Franklin County can continue to grow, continue to prosper, and we can be sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Eric, anything? Lane? You're good? All right. We appreciate, again, everybody being here, and I appreciate, guys, Eric, understand our questions, since we're all elected officials, and if people in town become impatient, they can fire us at the next election. They have that right, of course. That's what prompted my question, but they answered it well. So thank you for, you and Ellie, for both being here, driving down today, and being a part of this process with us. I'm sure there'll be questions in the future. We'll be contacting you again, so I appreciate your future help as well. That will be coming down the road. So anybody have any other questions or comments?
For Chris, do you believe mass grading our site would make it appreciably more marketable? I think as of right now, we're going to bring all utilities to it and roads, but whether or not to spend additional money, go ahead and mass grade it, make a true level site, or I guess would those resources be better spent somewhere else? What's your opinion? What do you see?
You know, it's a tough question. I'll defer to Darren in a second, but you mass grade it for the wrong client who wants something this way or that way, puts you in a disadvantage. It doesn't hurt to be the kid and push some dirt around out there and the client sees activity happening. And again, you don't want to put resources out there just to be show and tell, but utilities are more important, and where they are and how quickly they can be brought to the site. But you start grading and the client wants the other side. I mean, I think you got to be careful to not do too much unless you're going to put the building up. Then you can grade that and have it ready. But I wouldn't get too engaged in mass grading, because then you've put yourself at a disadvantage for a client who might want something differently. I don't know if you agree there.
Yeah, I would generally agree. You know, what we've talked about in terms of the mass grading on this particular property isn't necessarily building the pad, but trying to get things draining toward a regional detention basin so that a lot of that is in place. And I think there would be some value in spending money to get that going and moving in the right direction. Obviously, we had to deal with some wetland concerns, paid some credits to take care of that issue, which has been resolved so that we can go out there and move dirt quickly. As Chris said, I mean, we see a lot too. Bulldozers on site, gets people excited, things are happening, and the less the client has to do potentially coming in if that stormwater is in, for example, is a benefit. Is there, again, the silver bullet, right or wrong? Is it spend it now, spend it later? It's kind of 50-50, but it's something I think is worth discussion. Thank you.
Commissioner, I was actually probably more interested, personally, thinking we needed to do the grading and the stormwater. This last client actually did not want to participate in shared stormwater, and it was highly unusual, I will say. But they would have preferred to have their own detention, and I was really surprised at that. So I'm now at the 50-50, because I don't know that couldn't happen to us again.
I just wanted to get a feel for how common it was, if it was expected, if it was something to eliminate us, if it's a good use of resources at this point.
Because one of the site consultant team said, well, generally, yeah, having that done. But mostly what they wanted to know was, had we done the wetlands? In fact, we had done so much that when I said, no, we already have all the credits and all that, and he said, well, then you're way ahead right there. That was more concerning to him, that in the environmental as far as historical and all that, than anything about the dirt. So I would have to say we're probably where, unless we get to the point of a building or we partner with somebody who's going to put in a building. That was interesting feedback for me too. In fact, at one point, they actually shared with us too the covenants that we've got as draft, they almost weren't enough for that specific business. That was highly unusual too. So I don't know that that's a trend. It was just interesting to me that somebody, literally, we got in the elevator and I said, they basically just told us we have not put enough constraints on, and I'm surprised to hear that. So because it was, and I was just like, well, okay. So, we did want to make one more offer, just for anybody who maybe hasn't seen the PowerPoint on how the process in detail works. We have an example PowerPoint if you want to stay, if there's some, because some of you have seen it, so it's not necessarily worth your staying, but some of you may not have with a specific project that we did. So you're welcome to stay for that if you like.
Just one more quick question. I've had people too ask, when will the project be finished out there as far as we're concerned? Now, if Darren or Dennis can answer that question for as utilities, or are we looking at spring of this next year or summer?
Oh, I would say probably more like fall of this next year.
About a year from now?
We have everything on site pretty much right now. We're working through the USDA process to have the money to do the sewer line. That's probably a month away at this point in time to move forward with that. We actually right now have all the poles and everything ready to go to have electric out there. That has been deterred a little bit by what's going on with the roads and the sidewalks and some of those kinds of things. The contractor put the sidewalks in was to do it with a machine and not manually. And so until they get those sidewalks in, it deters us from doing our pads for our poles. So, you know, those are ongoing conversations, and, you know, we'll continue to talk and make those things happen. But the contractors biting at the bit, quite honestly, ready to work on the electric at this point in time. And so everything's in place and everything's ready to move. It's just that coordination to make it happen.
So, Dennis, you addressed electric and sewer, but you didn't address water.
Water is already in.
Great. That's what I wanted everyone to hear.
Good. Anybody else have any other questions?
One of the things I wanted to, we talked a little, quite a bit really about partnerships between the county and the city and school district and all of those. But I think one of the important partnerships that we need to maintain and develop and expand is with our current employers, the Walmarts and the American Eagles and the Kalmars, so that they're partners when we are recruiting, that this is a great community to have a company in, and supportive in how we work together and how the labor force comes to them and those kinds of things, that they can testify also that, yeah, you can come here and make it work. So I just wanted to throw that out, that business retention and expansion is still an important part of your community.
Okay, good. Wendy, how long is the PowerPoint?
About 15 slides.
Okay, all right, sure. If someone has that had to leave, I can go right ahead. But anyway, you want to go ahead and get that started? Sure.
Sure.
I have a couple minutes.
Yep.
Okay, so we just talked about partnerships. This just reinforces that. This also takes a partnership within the staffing of folks, and that includes departments within each organization, as well as economic development partners. And that partnership group is more than FCDC. It's the chamber, it's tourism, it's Main Street. So we just want to tell you that. This was an example a couple of years ago up at 23rd and Eisenhower. This is the site and how we show the site, and we note the roads and things like that, so we can help them orient. And then in this case, what they were looking at was a warehouse distribution terminal. Because of the way the zoning and things are there and some of the other businesses that already exist, we mark that out and then show how retail can be on the front, including restaurants and things. So some of those businesses want to know that they're in close proximity for folks to be able to go eat or do a little shopping on their lunch hour or before and after work. But again, noting where the highways are is always important for some of them. Then we always provide mapping of utilities. This site doesn't show as well, for example, as Proximity Park, because the utilities are there but not into the site. They're just nearby. So water, sewer, electric, and that kind of thing. And this site, we actually almost always talk about the things that the state can do possibly with us in partnership for Eisenhower Road. And that's another partner that we often work with, not just Commerce, but DOT. We don't want to leave them out of the group that we talk to whenever we're developing. And that's true for even Proximity Park, because DOT is helping fund the intersection improvements and hope to ongoing be a partner to improve it up to the level that our study says. So just in the timing standpoint, wanted to give an example that we heard from somebody on the 28th of October, and we needed to respond by the November 1st. Y'all know there's 3 more days left in that, so it doesn't give you much time. The first parameters were, they wanted to build 2 20 to 30,000 square foot facilities, or if we had to build the suit, that's what the BTS is, they needed 40 to 50 acres. They wanted to be close to BNSF on that case. But it didn't need to be at the site, and they would have storage outside and 60 employees. Okay, I want you to pay attention because everything changes, not just our side of the deal. Sometimes it's their side of the deal. We didn't hear from them again, remember, November 1st till December 14th. But then, within a month, we had to have more information. The size went from 500 to 700,000 square feet. You remember what it was before? 20 to 30. 200 employees. Now we had KDOC was going to help with this, and probably DOT if need be. And we needed the estimates for the infrastructure. So we had to get far enough along to really know what those costs were going to be, not just a broad, yeah, we could do an entrance or a signal. We had to make sure and tell them all of the use and zoning pieces, the city utilities, as well as gas, phone, and high-speed internet. This next one, the environmental impacts. We had to know the wetlands. We had to have the phase 1 survey done. We had to know the soils. Now we have all that for Proximity Park, which puts it in great shape. That's where we compete maybe better than some of our own other sites or some within the region, because we have all of that. We need to know the road surface for them. They actually wanted to know what was it. That's not common, but it comes up. And they wanted to know emergency providers, also not always common. Sometimes they'll ask about health care. And who the other employers were. Now, some of this, as Chris said, they could give by just looking at our standard page, but we had to put all that together. And then were there any other distribution centers? Now, we weren't sure if that was a good or a bad thing, right? Are they competing, or are they wanting to know that we employ employees that way? They want to know connected cost, extension costs, and any sharing. They want to actually look and know more about the plans that we had developed, the road, had we actually designed some of this, which in that site case, we have not. The owner, in that case, was outside of us, so they had to put together some of those engineering costs, so they were a partner. In the case of Proximity Park, we would put all of that together. We talked in a lot more detail about the zoning and any buffering, any setback issues. Finance department began estimating the tax abatements based on that shift, because when you get to 200 employees, our policy is more generous, rightfully so. And then the state got together their part. So we're all in that 3-week meeting quite often, usually once a week, trying to make sure that we're all putting together a concert kind of a proposal so that we're all together. So again, we also then, and some of this you've got, but they also want to know other tax information, the utility rates. So sometimes that's a part of what we are incentivizing with. The manager, administrators are going to keep you all informed. FCDC is going to get a lot of information from outside of us. For example, the railroad, if they need a spur, what is it, where is it, how much is it going to cost? Could be KCPL. We need something from them, or just Kansas Gas. But as we said, sometimes the Chamber of Tourism and Main Street are also involved. This last project that we talked about, John and Sherry put together neat little packets that we gave out at site, and John was a part of the presentation. It's becoming more common for part of the question to be, what is the community? Who is the community? A little bit more about our schools, our healthcare, our amenities, our parks, than maybe 10 years ago, when that wasn't the question. It was all about the site. So it's important to have those partners as well. The original deal we offered, the very first one, was 80% tax abatement for the 200 jobs. DOT was working for the road infrastructure, and then here was what the developer was going to do. They were going to pay site development fees and permits. The electric extension was $235,000, so they were going to pay that. There was a $66,000 water impact fee and a $54,000 sanitary sewer benefit district fee that were already established. They're out there in existence. The second offer We waived the lift station impact fee, just cut that. We still had the 80% tax abatement. That's the highest in our thing, in our schedule. Still had the road infrastructure. Skipping down, we offered to split the electric extension fee, and the rest remained the same. So we basically came up with another $280,000 off the costs. While in that case we didn't get the deal, it wasn't related to us and actually the offer. It was because where they picked a location on geography, and they told us that. They thought the state package was great, which was good for us to know that our state was competing well, and they appreciated KDOT, and that they got right back to us, which is also important. And for you all, when you work with the state legislative team, to be sure that they too appreciate Commerce and DOT for their economic development areas, because if they don't respond well, we really are in trouble. And so that can make a big difference. They thought our location was good, labor costs at that time and land pricing was fine, and they appreciated the tax abatement, and knew that if we start having more details, it might be different. They thought our responsiveness and reductions were also good. So it's just to kind of say those offers, each deal is different. Other things that they want to know when you get back to, we talk about labor study, they'll look at other policies, they'll look at our website, they'll look at the paper's website, they look to see whether we're contentious, whether the community's involved. They'll look at the things you would expect, the floodplain, traffic study, railroad. College and technical schools is always on there, and that's, again, as Richard said, we're well positioned, and even the superintendent met us out on the last site deal and talked specifically about those areas of workforce, which is important. Sometimes noise and air pollution. We've had a few if you're too close to railroad. So it's, on one hand, it's good to be there. On some businesses, it's not. So every deal is a little different. We position well on the labor union issue compared to Missouri. So those are all other things that they look at. So we just wanted to kind of wrap that back around and say the process can be very, very fast on ours. So we don't have much time. The last deal, we got it late on Friday, and Blaine put the response back together because it had to be back that day. Late on Friday, back that day. It's not, that's pretty unusual, but we have to do what we have to do as a team, and if we have to sit down and it's just Dennis and I, we will. We want to get them the information they want as fast as they can have it, but not be, the other thing that the site selectors when I went to the conference said, but don't overpromise. You want to overdeliver, not overpromise.
Good
So
point.
that's just another 5 minutes worth of stuff, so happy to answer questions.
Wendy, is the ISO rating something that's common that a lot of companies look at?
Depends on the situation, and because of a lot of times it's sort of like this last site selector. It obviously had some experiences with floodplain, so sometimes they'll say, I want to not touch that. Others will go, yeah, I get it. I'm okay with it because it's going to be an amenity I can walk over to and enjoy. ISO can be that way too. If they've had an experience with fire or because of whatever their business is, it matters drastically to their policy. If they're a business that really needs to be sure that they can be provided with the protection as well as the water. Now, and if for those of you who don't know, that's our fire department is at 3. We'd like to be at 2, but out there for us to really serve fire, that's when that third phase of the park with the water tower will probably be in play. But we talked to them about how we can get that done. Yeah. And we've also talked if there was somebody that really needed it, we'd work through that with them. But it's not always common, but sometimes it's a bit. And when you get one of those 34 pages, they're going to ask because they're asking literally everything. Enrollment at each level of school. It's when you get one that long, I don't know if there's anything they don't ask. And you'd be surprised. That's why it takes so long to put one of those together, because you have to have that data every time. So I have to go back over to school district, whoever, and get to be sure you're giving them accurate data. Because if they take that information and then pull up a website and it's different, again, they're looking for a way to cut you. And if it looks like you don't know, but it's also important for us to keep our websites up. So we're matching that.
Well, just a question came up, and Chris, with you, if you'd answer this, since a decision needs to be made quickly, and we're rookies at this, of course. At what point do elected officials get into this decision-making process? And what's that saying about too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the soup? We don't want to do that. So do you delegate this to your city and county authorities to negotiate? Maybe Richard can address that, whoever can. What's your experience been in the past, anyway?
I mean, you need to be involved, but
Yeah.
the quick decision-making, you need to let Richard and Wendy be able to respond because they already know what your response is. But small town communities in the Midwest, they want to see you too. I mean, there's sometimes a little too much of the walk-in committee, but then again, that certain clients, certain consultants love it. Others don't, because now we just let everybody know we're in town. It's a balancing act, but as long as the staff knows how you're going to react and can make commitments based on we need to go in front of you, you can't say, I can't tell you anything until we meet, but I think we're going to do this, but it still needs to have an approval. So the consultants know that. They deal with communities all the time.
Yep. It's good.
So just to add on to that, and I'm pretty sure this is the way Derek does it on his side also, but one of the important things we always say is this: what we're presenting you is dependent upon final approval by the governing bodies. As some of you know who have been on the commission through this, we stay in touch with the elected officials, and we've had special meetings at a moment's notice for you to approve a package. So there has to be a little bit of faith here that we're in step with the elected officials, and I think we've done pretty good. When we put together something, you're always in the loop. You're going to give final approval to that, and we're going to give, that you'll do the review of that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Anybody have any other additional questions? Guess we're good. Well, again, thank everybody for being here today, and especially our out-of-town guests. Welcome back anytime. So, nothing else, I guess we are adjourned. Thank you.